The little girl took his hand because she thought it was her mother's. That was how it started. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas, in the lobby of the Castellan Hotel, where the garland along the front desk smelled like pine cleaner and the tree near the play corner blinked on a 2-second loop. Celia had been sitting on a foam floor mat with a paper crane she'd folded from a cocktail napkin, turning it over in her small hands, when Marisol had stepped behind the service counter to restock the syrup shelf. She'd been gone 40 seconds, maybe less. Long enough. The man was standing at the edge of the lobby reading something on his phone when the wait arrived at his right hand. He looked down. A 4-year-old with dark braids and a red cardigan was looking back up at him with complete confidence, as though she'd made a careful selection and stood by it. He did not pull away. That detail, the fact that he simply did not pull away, was the one Marisol would return to for weeks afterward, trying to locate the moment her life had changed direction. She did not know his name yet. She only knew her wrist ached under its brace, her apron smelled like steamed milk, and her daughter was standing beside a stranger in a charcoal suit holding his hand. Marisol had been in the city for 3 years, in the same rented 2-bedroom for the last 22 months. And for the last 2 of those months, she had been $900 short on rent with a landlord who sent texts in all capitals. She had moved here after Derek left, which was a way of saying after Derek had made it clear he intended to leave, but wanted to take 6 months of her savings and most of her self-regard with him first. She'd found the barista job because the hotel manager had been willing to overlook her lack of formal experience. If she committed to holiday coverage, she took it. She took it and the seamstress work on the side, alterations and hemming, and the occasional formal gown for a woman who found her on a neighborhood app, because $900 didn't close itself. The wrist brace was from Derek too, though she'd told the urgent care clinic she'd slipped on a step. That had been 8 months ago. The brace was soft and beige, and she wore her sleeve over it, and it ached most on the days she carried supply crates. She noticed Celia from across the lobby, and the breath left her body. She set the syrup bottles down without looking and walked. The man looked up when she reached them. His eyes were dark and still, and the room had a quality she hadn't noticed until he turned toward her, a quality of having organized itself around him the way water organizes around a stone. He was somewhere in his late 30s, with a jaw that carried no expression she could read. And he was holding her daughter's hand with the same steady calm you'd extend to something fragile. She said she was looking for her mother, he said. His voice was level, not warm, not cold, factual. I'm her mother, Marisol said. I'm so sorry. Celia, come here. Celia did not come immediately. She looked up at the man. What's your name? He considered the question. Henry. I'm Celia. She patted his hand once, then released it and crossed to Marisol with a paper crane still in her fist. Henry watched them. Just for a moment, 2 seconds at most. Something moved behind his eyes that Marisol couldn't name. Then he went back to his phone. Marisol got Celia resettled, retrieved the syrup bottles, and did not think about him again for approximately 4 minutes, which was how long it took Rosario to walk through the hotel's front door. Her aunt arrived the way she always arrived, announcing herself with the sound of her coat against the revolving door and the particular expression she wore when she was about to be kind. Rosario was 61, dressed well on her husband's pension, and she had a way of reducing Marisol that operated entirely through the register of concern. She came to the service counter and placed both hands on it. Mija, she said, you look exhausted. I'm fine, Marisol said. I have 20 minutes left on my shift. You're working Christmas week. Rosario glanced at the foam mat where Celia was refolding her crane. A hotel cafe. You always said you wanted more than this. One of the other baristas, a college student named Jesse who was on his second day, had paused refilling the cup rack. He was pretending not to listen with the focused intensity of someone listening very hard. "I have more than this," Marisol said. Her voice was level. Her wrist ached. Rosario lowered hers. "I only say it because I worry. A woman your age, with a child, in this city. You could have stayed closer to family. There were men who asked about you before." She shook her head. "Before everything. You've let yourself go a little, haven't you, sweetheart? You know I only notice because I love you." Marisol said, "I'll call you on Christmas." She turned back to the espresso machine. Rosario left, satisfied with the outcome she'd intended. Jessie set the cups down without a word. Marisol counted backwards from 8 in her head, a technique she'd learned in a free workshop at the public library, and her hands stayed steady. She was going to mention the story here. If you're new to it, drop a comment below and she'll find you there. But the story itself pulls harder than any aside. The next morning Derek came. She hadn't seen him in 5 months, which was 1 month after he decided the unpaid rent on the apartment they'd briefly shared was her debt to settle and not a joint accounting error. He walked into the hotel cafe at 10:47 on a Wednesday morning and stood in the entry for a moment, looking around the way a man looks around a room he owns. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe she had simply gotten used to not bracing for him. He ordered nothing. He came to the counter. "You look good," he said, in the tone that meant she did not. "I heard you were working here. Hotel barista, that's..." He paused. "I mean, it suits you," Marisol said. "I'm working." "You owe me $1,200, Derek said. "From the shared account, I have records." "There were no shared records of any debt I owe you," she said. "We've been through this." "I've been patient," he said. "That's done." Celia was in the play corner. Derek looked at her. Then he looked back at Marisol with an expression she recognized, the one where he had made a decision and was letting her understand it before announcing it. "I'll take her for a few days. Until this is settled. You know I have standing." He did not have standing. He was not Celia's father in any legal sense, any biological sense, or any sense at all. He had been in their lives for 11 months and had spent most of that time making clear that Celia was an inconvenience he tolerated. "You're not going near her," Marisol said. "I'm going near her right now," Derek said, and stepped around the counter toward the play corner. She did not have time to get there first. She stepped forward and he put a hand on her forearm, and the hand landed directly on the wrist brace, and the pain was immediate and specific. She made a sound she hadn't intended to make. The lobby was not empty. A couple by the elevator, a man with a briefcase at the front desk, Jessie behind the counter, and Henry Garcia, who had been seated at a corner table with a coffee and a folded newspaper for the past 20 minutes, and who had been watching the exchange with the complete, practiced stillness of a man trained not to react before he had assessed. He stood up. He did not hurry. He covered the distance to the play corner in a way that looked like walking until Derek had already turned and registered him. And by then, Henry was close enough that the distance itself was the statement. "The girl stays," Henry said. Derek looked at him. "Who are you?" It was not precisely a question. It was the thing people said when they needed a moment to recalibrate. Henry let the silence answer. Thomas materialized from near the front entry, dark jacket, hands loose at his sides, and stationed himself 3 feet behind Derek with the posture of someone who had done this before and found it routine. "The girl stays," Henry said again. "You'll leave the hotel. You'll leave the block. If the woman owes you money she disputes, you'll document it and you'll pursue it through the proper process. That process is the only process available to you." You can't, Derek started. I have, Henry said. Derek looked at Thomas. He looked at the lobby, which had gone very quiet in the way lobbies go quiet when everyone present has decided to look somewhere else. He left. He didn't say anything else, and he didn't look at Marisol. And the revolving door pushed him out into the cold December street, and the garland above the front desk went on blinking its 2-second loop. Marisol was holding her wrist with her other hand. Celia had not moved from her mat. She was watching Henry with the same careful attention she'd extended to him the day before. You need a doctor for that, Henry said to Marisol. I'll be fine, she said. Tonight, he said, not asking. She looked at him. She looked at Thomas, who had the professional expression of a man waiting for instructions without appearing to wait. She looked at Celia, who had folded a second crane from a second napkin and was holding it out toward Henry with the casual authority of someone making a gift. Henry took it and put it in his jacket pocket without comment. That evening, Thomas drove them in a black sedan with quiet heat and tinted windows to a private clinic on the 14th floor of a building whose lobby had no signage. Dr. Lena Pacheco was silver-haired and thorough, and she took 3 sets of images of Marisol's right wrist and documented the healed fracture and the improperly set bone with a precision that suggested she was accustomed to work that might serve as a record. This was broken, she said, not unkindly. 8 months ago, approximately. I fell, Marisol said. Lena looked at her for a moment. Of course, she said. She documented it anyway. Celia sat in a chair across the room and asked Lena her full name, her dog's name, and whether she thought paper cranes could actually fly if you threw them hard enough. Lena answered all 3 questions. Afterward, Thomas drove them to a building Marisol had not been to before, where the elevator required a key card. And the 22nd floor had an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city dressed for Christmas. The bridges strung with lights, the streets below trailing headlights like slow sparks. There were groceries in the refrigerator. There were clothes folded on the dresser in a bedroom that smelled of clean linen, soft items, practical items, in sizes that were her sizes without her having told anyone. She stood in the doorway of that bedroom for a long moment. Celia ran to the window and pressed her face against the glass and breathed fog onto it. Henry came the next evening and the evening after that. He did not stay long. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and he listened to Celia describe the paper cranes she had been making, an increasingly complex taxonomy of styles she had invented herself and named after animals. He asked questions she could answer. He did not ask Marisol questions she would have found difficult to answer, which was a restraint she noticed and could not quite account for. On the 3rd evening, he stayed after Celia was asleep. Marisol was at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and the seam work she'd brought with her, a bridesmaid's gown with a dropped hem. And the apartment was quiet in the specific way of a high floor in a city at night, all the noise flattened by altitude into something that resembled peace. Henry sat across from her. She sewed. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn at intervals. You moved here 3 years ago, he said. It was not a question, which meant he already knew. Yes. With Celia. She was 1, Marisol said. Almost 1. I needed somewhere new. He turned the cup. The debt he claims doesn't exist, she said. There was a shared account for utilities. I paid more than my share, and he withdrew the balance before I could close it. He'd been planning it. Henry said nothing for a moment. Then, it's been confirmed. My team found no documentation supporting the amount he named. The debt doesn't exist in any form. She set the seam down. Your team. Tomas spoke with him, Henry said, and others. She wanted to ask what that meant exactly. She looked at his face, and decided the answer was already visible in the set of his jaw and the patience in his posture. In the way he spoke about it, as though it were a logistical matter already resolved. It was resolved. She could feel it. "I need to ask you something," she said. He waited. "The first day, when Celia took your hand, she watched him. You could have just walked her back to the counter. You didn't have to stand there." Something shifted in his expression, small and deliberate. He reached into his jacket pocket, the left interior one, and set a small folded paper crane on the kitchen table between them. Not the second one Celia had made that morning in the lobby. The first one, from the day before, folded from a cocktail napkin, slightly soft at the edges from sitting in his pocket through 2 days. He had kept it. Marisol looked at it for a long time. She understood then that the obligation he felt was not an obligation at all. It was something he didn't have a word for either. Or maybe a word he hadn't used in long enough that it needed testing before he could say it. If you have come this far with this story, you already understand what that crane on the table meant, because you are the kind of person who notices small, kept things. She reached out and touched the edge of it with one finger. "Okay," she said. That was all. It was enough. The intimacy between them came slowly, over 3 more evenings, building in the way that trust builds in a person who has learned to read rooms before entering them. A hand covered hers over the seamwork, warm and still. His mouth at her temple in the dim kitchen after the city lights had blurred soft through the glass. An evening where Celia fell asleep on the couch between them, and neither of them moved to disturb it. And then a night, a quiet night with the city glittering 22 floors below, and Celia sleeping behind a closed door, where the distance between them closed entirely, slowly, with the gravity of a decision rather than an accident. He wanted her the way she had not been wanted in years, with a care that was physical and specific and unhurried. And her body, which had been a source of commentary and dismissal for so long, became under his hands a thing he was glad of. She stayed awake afterward, listening to the quiet, and thought that she had not known this was what she had been holding the absence of. Thomas left his spare phone on the kitchen counter on the 4th night, the one with a single contact saved and labeled simply as a 2-digit number. He left it there while he checked something in the hallway and came back. And while he was in the hallway, Marisol looked at the phone on the counter and at the contact, and she understood, in the specific way that a woman who has survived alone understands useful information, that she had been shown this on purpose. She did not say anything about it. She put the information in the part of her mind she kept for practical resources. The faction came on a Thursday. Marisol learned later that their leader's name was not one she needed to know, that he ran an operation along a stretch of territory Henry's organization had been in quiet dispute over for 2 years, and that he had been watching the building. What she understood in real time was that 2 men she did not recognize came through the building's service entry at 4 in the afternoon, that the building's front staff called up to the apartment on a secondary line, and that when she looked through the hallway camera feed on the monitor by the door, she saw them heading for the elevator. Celia was in the living room. The paper cranes she had made over the past week were lined up on the windowsill in front of the city, 17 of them, organized by size. Marisol did not freeze. She had been in this apartment for 6 days, and she had been reading it from the first hour, the locks, the camera feed, the secondary line, the phone on the kitchen counter. She picked up Thomas's spare phone and pressed the 2-digit contact, and when it connected, she said, "2 men in the service elevator, floor 22. And then she locked Celia and herself in the bedroom, with a chair under the handle, and sat on the floor with her back against the bed and Celia in her lap. Celia said, Are we hiding? We're waiting, Marisol said. For Henry? She held her daughter tighter. For Henry. It took 11 minutes. She counted them. The sound from the hallway was controlled and not prolonged. And she heard Henry's voice once, level and without any elevation at all. And then Thomas said something through the bedroom door, and she moved the chair. Henry was in the hallway. He looked at her and then at Celia, and the set of his jaw changed by a fraction, the only visible sign of what those 11 minutes had cost him. Tomas's phone, he said. You left it on the counter. He looked at her for a moment. Then, quiet, almost to himself, yes. The faction leader's arrangements were unwound across the following 48 hours without spectacle or announcement. Henry did not explain the details to her. He did not need to. What she knew was that by Friday, the building's security staff had doubled, that the service entry required a second key card, and that Thomas reported, in the dry procedural register he used for everything, that the specific individuals who had entered the building would not be returning. The faction leader himself, she understood, had been removed from every arrangement he held. A phone call from Henry, presumably. She had learned by then that Henry's phone calls ended things. Derek was folded into the same resolution, quietly and without violence, that she was asked to witness. Thomas told her the following Monday that the claimed debt of $1,200 had been investigated and found entirely undocumented, and that Derek had understood the finding and would not be contacting her again. She asked Thomas what that meant exactly. Thomas said, "It means he understood." The Christmas gathering was at a family associate's home, a house with a long table and 3 generations worth of chaos, and a 7-foot tree decorated by children who had not agreed on a theme. Rosario was there because Rosario had a talent for locating events she had not been invited to. Marisol saw her from across the room, standing near the food table in her good coat, and felt the familiar compression in her chest. Rosario found her near the kitchen. Celia was across the room demanding that Henry lift her high enough to touch a specific ornament on the tree, which he was doing with the calm of a man who had decided this was an acceptable use of his time. "Well," Rosario said, looking at Henry, "you've attached yourself to someone important." She said it the way she said everything, at the register of concern. "I hope you're not embarrassing yourself, Mija. A man like that doesn't stay for women like." She gestured, a small, inclusive wave that covered Marisol's general direction. "You know what I mean." The room had not gone quiet. It was loud with children and music, and someone arguing about whether the tamales needed more time. But the 2 or 3 people nearest them had heard, and were looking at the floor or their plates in the particular way of people who have heard something they wish they hadn't. Henry set Celia down with the ornament in her hand. He had been across the room, and Marisol had not seen him move. But he was beside her now. And the quality of the air in the immediate vicinity of that corner changed in the way it always changed. He put his hand at Marisol's back. He looked at Rosario with the expression he used when something had already been settled. "My household," he said. "My family." He said it without volume or ceremony. He said it the way he said everything, as a statement of what existed in the world. Marisol and Celia, mine. He touched the small of her back once, deliberate. That's the last time this particular concern is raised. Rosario opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her script had stopped working. Marisol watched her aunt's face run through 3 or 4 expressions in sequence, landing on something that resembled the private recognition of a woman who has just discovered she misjudged how much leverage she actually held. Rosario looked at the 2 or 3 people near them who had heard. She put her plate down on the table. She found her coat somewhere around the hallway, and she left, and the door closed, and the Tamale argument resumed across the room. Marisol felt her chest open like a window. Celia appeared at Henry's knee and held the ornament up for his approval. He examined it, a small painted cardinal, and told her it was a good one. She agreed and went back to the tree to find a place for it. He was not watching Rosario leave. He was watching Celia at the tree with his hand still at Marisol's back. And there was something in his face, in that moment, that she had been cataloging across 3 weeks, and now finally had a name for. It was not obligation. It was not arrangement. It was the specific look of a man who has found the thing he did not know he was accounting for, and has no intention of looking away. They drove back to the 22nd floor in the sedan, with the quiet heat. Celia asleep between them, before the building was in sight, her head against Marisol's side and her fingers loosely holding the painted cardinal she had insisted on carrying home. The apartment smelled like the cedar candle Marisol had found on the second day and lit every evening since, and the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was dressed in all its Christmas Eve excess. The bridges bright, the streets below moving with the patient flow of people who were almost home. Marisol carried Celia to the bedroom and tucked her in and stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at her daughter's face, smooth and completely unconcerned. 17 paper cranes lined up on the windowsill, catching the city light. The crane from the first day was still on the kitchen table. It had been there since Henry placed it down, and she had touched its edge, and neither of them had moved it. She went back out to the main room. Henry was on the balcony, the door open, the cold air coming in thin and clean. She got her coat from the hook and went out. The city was something from up here. 22 floors was high enough to see the whole curve of the river, high enough that the holiday lights were spread below like a second sky. She stood beside him, and the cold was the good kind of cold, specific and awake. She said, "What does it mean when you say mine?" He looked at the city for a moment, not performing thought, actually considering the way he considered everything, with the full weight of a man who did not say things he didn't mean. "It means exactly that," he said. "You and Celia, fixed, not temporary." She thought about the crane on the kitchen table. She thought about Celia asking his name on the first day and him answering without hesitation, the way you answer a child when you have decided they deserve a real answer. She thought about clothes in her size she had not asked for, and a doctor who documented everything, and a phone left on a counter in full view. "She's going to need a father," Marisol said. Not a question. A fact she was placing on the table the way he had placed the crane. "I know," he said. The wind moved, and she felt his hand close over hers on the railing. Warm. Still. The city turned below them, all that light. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. It was the kind of understanding that didn't need more words. The kind that had been building across 22 days of careful, specific acts. Across a kept paper bird and a doctor visit, and 11 minutes on a bedroom floor counting seconds, across a single declaration at a holiday table that had permanently ended a woman's authority to reduce her. The balcony door slid open behind them. Tomas stood in the frame. "Quiet night," he said. Standard report. But before he stepped back in, he looked at Marisol and said, without any particular ceremony, "Good night, Mrs. Garcia." Not miss. Not ma'am. Not the careful neutral address he had used for 3 weeks. He went back inside, and the door slid mostly closed, and the cold held them. Marisol did not correct him. Henry looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, the small private expression she had learned to read, the one that meant he was satisfied with how something had resolved. Inside, Celia slept with one hand open around the painted cardinal. The 17 cranes keeping watch on the sill, and the first one, the cocktail napkin crane that had started everything, sat on the kitchen table in the cedar-scented air, a small folded thing that had traveled in a man's jacket pocket for 3 weeks before finding where it was supposed to be.